So Natalia, tell me what part of San Francisco you live in.
I grew up in the Richmond district
How long have you lived in San Francisco?
my whole life. Yeah.
Tell me in a short way, why did you come today?
Oh, well, I'm obviously deeply concerned about displacement of low-income people, African Americans, working class people in San Francisco. Many of the people I grew up with don't live in the city anymore.
So tell me your question. What question did you write down that you had for the candidates to answer?
Well, something that seems not to be talked about a lot in this candidates race is what candidates are prepared to do to try to stem the tide of African American displacement in San Francisco. And I also wanted to know if candidates had any ideas for reparations for African American tenants who lost home equity during civic redevelopment and due to other city official housing policy in the past. And specifically, I wondered if candidates were prepared to speak on what they might do to support the tenants at the Midtown Park Apartments, which is an apartment complex. Which is an apartment complex in the Fillmore Western Addition, which was built as redevelopment housing for homeowners and tenants who lost their homes to civic redevelopment. The tenants now, 50 years later, are facing displacement at the hands of the city and Mercy Housing and are calling for no displacement, no demolition, rent control, or home equity. Thank you.
So this is a tough one, or tough couple there. Thank you so much for giving me your question. So that's a lot to tackle there, y'all. I'm gonna say try your best. Yeah. I'm sorry. Okay, so he's saying he's from the area that he's talking about.
From the Fillmore area that she's talking about.
Uh-huh.
This city has done ethnic cleansing in the Western Addition Fillmore area.
Let's add that to the question that we have here. Well, we've got to get out of here pretty soon. I'll give you 30 seconds. Here we go.
As a result, our nationality has been replaced, okay, and our population...
Come this way so you can speak into the mic so people can hear you, and then we'll add that to a question here.
My nationality has been displaced, and as a result, our numbers are nowhere near the populations of other nationalities in the city. Now, in order to correct this problem, we need an injunction relief to replace that 60 square block and footage that displaced all the black people in the Fillmore area. This Justin Herman, who displaced our neighborhood, okay, racially profiled that neighborhood in the overall city and got rid of the black skin colored population.
Tell me real quick, what's your name?
I'm Mr. Wright, okay?
And how long have you lived in San Francisco?
All my life.
Very good.
Okay, I'm old enough to be your grandfather.
Yes, you are.
Okay, now, because of this displacement, and then what makes it so bad for me is because after you displace all my nationality, I was doing construction and I helped build the Fillmore Center. You lied and said that the blacks that got displaced would be the first to move back in, but then you set the rents at a requirement higher than the income that the black people was making. So that's why we got a low amount of populations of blacks in the city now.
So let's get to your question. Well, I really want to get the candidates to answer.
In order to answer my question, you got to understand all the facts. That's why I'm letting you know.
I know, but we really got to get to the candidates' questions.
As a result of that displacement, all new housing that's being built is being set at an income requirement that's higher than the incomes of people, like Mission Rock.
So you'd like to make sure that housing is set at an income that is available for...
The incomes has got to be set for all incomes of people who live in the city. People that have disabilities, people who are on Social Security, and people who have permanent disabilities that's both mental and physical, and our veterans too. But you set
Thank you.
Let me finish. All
Well,
the buildings
we've
that you met,
we've also got to get everybody else's questions.
everybody's question.
It is
Nobody
5:11,
knows. I
sir.
know. Look, we got plenty of time.
So
But
why don't
just
you
let me
sit down
finish.
and let's
Just let me
get
finish.
these
Just let me
questions?
finish.
Will
I'm
you?
gonna show you an example. Like this building had been.
Okay.
Let me finish.
Let's
Let
sit
me
down.
finish.
Can you
Just let
please
me
sit
finish.
down?
Just let me finish.
Well, but we've given you a minute, and we've also need to get through somebody else's
We got
questions.
time to get to everybody else.
We don't
Yes,
actually.
How come
We
don't?
don't actually,
Where you
because
got
we
to
have
go?
to get out of this building. It's a rented piece.
That's one reason why you're not getting the problem taken care of.
Okay.
You're always rushing.
Okay, so the question was, how do we stop making the displacement? I'm sorry. Okay, so the question was, how do you stop the tide of African American displacement in the city, especially in the Fillmore area, to make sure that African Americans are not leaving the city as much as they used to be because they were targeted and because we have things called redlining and racist policies back in the day when housing and redevelopment agencies were available. So, for that reason, I'm going to... Right, so you're priced out. I get it. So, right. So we're going to start with Jane Kim, who's going to answer that question, or try to.
And I have 1 minute to answer this great question. So my team is working on a blueprint for having a mayor's office of race and equity within our administration, which would specifically develop a blueprint for how we bring back communities that have been displaced by histories of policies that have displaced them, particularly communities of colors and the African American community out of San Francisco. It takes a lot more than housing. We have to do intentional race-based investment on small businesses in African American communities that are Black-owned, on job programs that target the African American community, and also in housing as well. We have to build significantly more affordable housing. We have to consider preferences. City of Portland actually just announced a plan where they are targeting affordable housing preference for residents that have been displaced out of the city, and that is something that we should consider here in San Francisco too. But more than anything, we have to intentionally do investment in communities that build up economic power and economic power and job workforce in the communities to keep people in place here in San Francisco.
I have spent. I'm going to try to answer your question. Hold on a second. What?
Okay.
Okay.
Let her speak, y'all.
For the last 20 years, I've been a civil rights trial lawyer and represented over 80% of my clients are African American, and I totally understand how the city and county of San Francisco has shut the African American out of our city. Shut that whole community out of our city. Let me just say the quick answer to Midtown is that was a promise. It was a written promise, and they ought to go to court right now to save their fight. Right now. Right now. The best thing you can do is to fight back and not sit down and let it happen when it's a written promise, okay? That's that. When I ran for mayor, Willie Brown was in the race, and I kept saying, Willie, that 3rd Street rail is going to run Hunters Point out of town. You guys know it. You're building all of this property up on the hills there, and this 3rd Street corridor is going to be something that absolutely runs the African Americans out of town, and it did. So all of these things were foreseeable, and all I can say is that you have to go about the business of enforcing the MBE, LBE that I sponsored and I wrote. 16% of every job in this city that is given out by this city is supposed to go to African Americans and other minorities and women, and it's only 4%. So those that are in office need to explain why they're not enforcing the MBE, LBE laws.
Thank you.
We've seen the exodus of our African American population in this city ongoing for the past 30 years or more. And that is a tragic occurrence. We should learn from our mistakes because we're seeing it happen now to our Latino community as well. We're seeing it also happen with HIV-positive gay men and of other ethnicities with HIV. The pressures are on many communities. One way that we can address this, given that price containment for housing is as challenging as it is when we are making agreements to benefit new business sectors or for market rate development, we have to extract better benefits for our communities, and they need to be enforceable benefits for our community, and that includes local hiring. So now the Central Soma Plan is going to create 46,000 new jobs. Let's make sure they're not all coming from out of town. We should hire locally, and we can do that. Don't tell me there are not under and unemployed San Franciscans. I know many of these tech positions require great expertise. They're going to do searches around the world, but half of those jobs are for sales. We can hire locally. We need to train, and we need to make sure that these companies are focused on local hiring, and that will raise wages of San Franciscans to better meet the cost of housing.
Thank you.
Economic justice and reparations for the African American community has been part of my consciousness since I did a research project back in 2008 around the neighborhood that I moved into and learned about the redlining and learned about the horrific institutionalized racism that wiped out a community. So just specifically, it'd be interesting to do a universal basic income approach that was focused on SFUSD families that were African American families that were rent burdened, or start somewhere in that way. In terms of Midtown, yes, reparations are necessary. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a sit down at the table and have the Midtown residents be part of that process. And that's what really needs to happen, because there are 6 buildings there. And I was just talking with a group of Midtown residents the other night, and I was asking, well, how much will it cost to repair them? Are they all can they all be rehabilitated? And this cost of $10 million was put out there. And so because the city made so many missteps about this, it's important to work together with the residents to figure out what direction they want to go. And there might be the opportunity to work with the residents if it was low-income working families, African-American families that could come into those 2 new developments. There's lots of opportunities for discussion.
Thank you.